Just doing a quick level test. This is a levels test. Good afternoon and welcome to the Australian Psychedelic Society's special Bicycle Day event. And happy Bicycle Day to you if you have had a chance to go out and have a bike ride and get out into nature. Commendations. If you haven't, then do try and get out over the next week and have a bike ride. We down here in Melbourne had a bike ride yesterday with a few of us down by the Yarra River, and in Sydney there are about 30 to 40 people at a picnic in the Royal Botanic Gardens, enjoying some time together. You can get updates for all of our future events and articles from the Australian Psychedelic Society at our new website, psychedelicsociety.org.au. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter there, and you can also follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn. Is that all of the social media? I think that's all of the social media. So this afternoon we have a special treat for you, which has been organised by Jeff from APS in Sydney, and with assistance of Synergetic Press, who we want to give our thanks to as well. I'll be putting links in the comments as this session goes along, and if you do have any questions or comments during the session, please drop them into the comments and I'll pass them on to Jeff and Paul, who will be introducing shortly. So as I said, special day for Bicycle Day today, and we're going to be hearing from Dr. Paul Daley, who has over 30 years experience in analytical toxicology and environmental sciences. He has over 60 publications in integrated pest management, plant photosynthesis, environmental chemistry, and instrumentation for carbon isotope analysis. He's also the Research Director and Chemist at the Alexander Shulgin Research Institute in Lafayette, California, where his work focuses on the chemistry and pharmacology of psychedelic drugs. He co-authored the Shulgin Index, Volume 1, Psychedelic Phenethylamines and Related Compounds, published by Transform Press in 2011. He is also a founding partner and chief technical officer of Essential Medicinals, a medicinal cannabis concentrates producer. So I'm going to bring them on the screen now and hand over to Jeff. Jeff.
Thank you, Nick. And once again, thanks to Synergetic Press for this opportunity. And thanks, Paul, for taking the time. Happy Bicycle Day, everyone. So let's just start with you, Paul. If you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got involved in the Shulgin archiving project.
Great. Well, it kind of goes back a ways. I met Dr. Shulgin in 1977 when I was a brand new graduate student at University of California at Berkeley. There was a local paper that here in California was pretty notorious, famous, the Berkeley Barb, and it had an ad for the Second International Conference on Hallucinogenic Mushrooms in Washington State. And when I read the group of speakers that included Albert Hoffman and Gordon Wasson and Richard Evans Schultes, I pretty much decided that nothing could keep me from that meeting. So in fact, I met Sasha at that meeting and first walked into this room back here that I'm sitting in just about a month later. So despite the fact that I was kind of a hardline agricultural entomology student at Berkeley, I had a great passion for psychedelics. It just got kind of submerged as Mr. Nixon and his followers prosecuted the drug war that we still live with today. So I kind of continued to pursue my career in environmental sciences, but by the late 90s and early 2000s, kind of re-upped my acquaintance with Sasha. And by 2007, I volunteered to start working with him here in the lab, restoring the facility to workability, and continue to this day. So that gives you a capsule. I was very pleased. It was a pleasure of my life to become friends with Sasha, to learn from him, work with him, help him wrap some projects that he had a little bit stalled. And I think it was a very productive relationship.
Fantastic. So to contextualize this this conversation to Bicycle Day, I believe you're about to file incorporation papers for the Shulgin Research Institute. So we'll get you to talk about that in a minute. But one of the connections that stood out to me is the connection between Hoffman and Shulgin and their alchemical outlook on molecular chemistry. And I had a quote from you here: being an organic medicinal chemist is a bit like chemistry bifurcated from alchemy. And I thought that was really succinct and beautiful.
Yes, we're going to be challenged with the transmission across the waters. But I think I basically got your question. Yes, of course, Sasha's work started up well after Hoffman had made his major discoveries back in the 40s and 50s. But to kind of go back to your earlier remark, Sasha created kind of an informal wrapper around his work, which he referred to as the Alexander Shulgin Research Institute in the 1980s. Never really formulated it as a working business or formal institute. When he passed in 2014, my colleague Nick Cozy at the University of Wisconsin, who Sasha had put together with me in 2003, we started to, we had already been publishing using the Alexander Shulgin Research moniker as our institutional association, but we decided that it was time to consider making it a bit more formal. And with the rapid increase in interest in psychedelics here in the last year, we found that the time was right. We found some advisors to help us set up the business side of it. And it turns out we are going to be filing incorporation papers for the incorporation of Alexander Shulgin Research Institute, what'll be for us tomorrow, Bicycle Day.
Fantastic. So
and then all we have to do is find a new home. The lab here is only 200 square feet. So we need a new place where we can expand a bit.
Wow. Look forward to seeing how that unfolds. So you have a team that's colloquially known as the Shulgin team. Could you tell us who they are and what their various roles are?
Yes, absolutely. So the Alexander Shulgin Research Institute is really going to focus on the technical side of continuing Sasha's work, but there is quite a well-developed team of folks who have handled the archiving of his notebooks, correspondence, collected papers. Sasha was a rabid reader and collector of information about the dawning interest in psychedelics as it grew along with his career. So we give a great shout out to the Arrowwood Center, who have taken the responsibility of managing the scanning and ultimately the digital vault that will contain all of the written material. So Earth and Fire Arrowwood, Keeper Trout, Sylvia Tyson have put in an enormous amount of work going through many boxes of documents, tapes, movies, old actual 16mm film. There's quite an amazing collection of material here. I kind of kiddingly say that the Shulgins never threw anything out, and that was great, but the bad part was that they never threw anything out. So it's been quite an archaeological effort. Also, of course, I think as you brought up Transform Press, the formal publications that Sasha and Anna are well known for, PCAL and TCAL, and more recently the Shulgin Index, are all published by Transform Press. And Anne's daughter Wendy is now managing the press and has partnered with Synergetic. So we've actually got a new three-volume series slated to start coming out a little later this spring. This would be based on Sasha's one of Sasha's classes, which he called "On the Nature of Drugs."
Wow.
It's a lay class, so it was aimed at people who didn't know chemistry, didn't know pharmacology, physiology. So it's a broad introduction in layman's terms into what are drugs, what do we consider drugs to be, what are our social apprehensions and reservations about drug use. And it's actually an almost verbatim transcription of one of his classes from 1987, with a few additions to kind of clarify points as we go along. But I think people will enjoy reading it. It really captures Sasha's voice in a lovely way.
That sounds fantastic, and no doubt will become a critical text in the psychedelic tome of literature. And that's The Nature of Drugs through Synergetic Press. So yeah,
I think it'll actually be transformed, but the two organizations are partnering.
Okay, great.
Transform Press.
Great. So yeah, that sort of brings me nicely to the Shulgin method, because they sort of measured every aspect of the experience, not just the medical, the physiological, the psychological, but again, the social, as you pointed out. Would you like to elaborate a bit on the Shulgin method itself?
Well, first off, keep in mind that Sasha's major contributions to like original discovery of psychedelics really focused on the phenethylamines. If you go through all the compounds in Pikal, phenethylamines I've known and loved, many of them, I don't want to give an exact percentage, but many of them were his original, based on his original publications that go back to the early 60s. And at that time, the tools that were available to tell whether a drug was potentially psychedelic or not were very, very limited. We didn't have reliable animal studies. You could do some basic toxicology, but Sasha just did, I think, maybe after his decapitation, that really wasn't telling him very much. A rat can't tell you if it's getting high. The basics of Shulgin's method, of course, were kind of couched by what was known about psychedelics at the time. People would ask him, how would you start the process? And his almost constant first response would be, well, if you've got a lump of crystal in your hand that's a new molecule that you've made, it's the only sample of it in the known universe, how would you decide how much of that to take if you thought that it might be a psychedelic drug? Would you take 10 milligrams, 10 micrograms, 10 femtograms? It was really kind of, an open question. Dr. Hoffman's experience in the discovery of LSD was a great warning post that some of these things could in fact be extremely potent. When talking about Bicycle Day, I loved Hoffman's description of he was working on a new batch of LSD because he somehow thought that he had to revisit it, even though it seemed to have flopped in what they thought its action would be when he first synthesized it. And when he went back on what became Bicycle Day, he took the smallest amount that could conceivably be thought to have any effect at all, 1/4 of a milligram. And of course, we know now that a 250 microgram dose
decent
pretty much will produce the full gamut of LSD effects. So Sasha would start with his creations at a very small level, maybe 10 micrograms. If there was any effect at all, or no effect, more likely, he would, in a couple of days, double it. No effect, couple of days, double it, and keep working it up, always being very attentive to his own physiological reactions, so watching his pulse rate, his blood pressure, body temperature, looking for any toxic effects, nausea, any paresthesias, feelings of tingling, or anything that might hint of a toxic effect. And then he would gradually work up the level that he was consuming until some threshold was met, where he actually could feel that something was happening. And then the process would continue until the full range of effects, again, always being very cautiously attentive to any side effects until the character of the substance was manifest. If he then found that the quality of the substance was desirable, he would share it with his close partner, his wife Anne. If the two of them decided collectively that, oh, this is interesting, this is useful, there was a group of, well, it varied, maybe from 8 to 20 here at the farm, not in the lab, and try one of the new substances. The only kind of rules were that at any point, if you needed help, you could stick up your hand and get help. No one could leave before the effects had returned back down to baseline, and everyone had to write up a report of what they experienced within 24 hours. So we still have all of those reports, and they're really kind of a unique contribution to psychopharmacology. They cover well over 100 compounds. The number is inexact, but there are these are anecdotal reports, but they demonstrate that these things could be safely administered to humans, and they cover fairly astute descriptions of the qualitative effects and the differences between all these different substances. I should point out that back in the 60s, when I was having my first experiences with psychedelics, the dogma was that the psychedelics that were known, mescaline, psilocybin, and LSD, produced the same effect. They just differed in potency and duration of the effect. Well, pretty much from the very start of Sasha's work, he found that was absolutely not true. One of the first, you might call it semi-synthetic, but one of the first modifications of the mescaline scaffold, which Sasha started with, was actually done in 1947. So trimethoxyamphetamine, an alpha-methyl derivative of mescaline was made. Sasha then, after his first mescaline experience, sort of moved into the path of this, made TMA. That particular compound is referred to as TMA, and his remark was, with mescaline, he could contemplate a rose for hours and be endlessly fascinated with its form and beauty. Under TMA, contemplating a rose, you wanted to take it apart. So there was a friendliness and a joyousness to mescaline that was somehow missing with TMA. So, being a good medicinal chemist, Sasha started to modify the structure, and basically the next compound made was a positional isomer of TMA, which he called TMA2. It's the 2,4,5-trimethoxyamphetamine. And not only was it substantially more potent than TMA, which in turn was substantially more potent by about twice than mescaline, but TMA2 returned some of the friendliness, the beauty of mescaline. So that was sort of the all Sasha really needed to know, that, oh, this is a rich palette of substances that probably have different qualities, And there's no way to predict necessarily what those qualities are going to be by just examining the structure. You simply have to make them and run them through that testing process.
Right.
So through that, he discovered, varying numbers again, but somewhere upwards of 175 validly active psychedelic compounds.
Wow. Yeah, I think I read when we came to the Shulgin Index that he had cataloged over 1,350 compounds, with only about a third of those having been tested so far. But what you're speaking about there really exemplifies the his rigorous approach to self-experimentation and dedication to the chemistry.
Yes.
And I think one of the also enduring legacies we get from that is the Shulgin rating scale, which is actually still a really useful quantitative potency scale. And I think it's still used in places like the Shroomery's mushroom dosage calculator. So that was...
You're referring to the plus, minus, plus,
yeah.
2 plus. Yeah, actually, there was an effort earlier than that to rank the straight potency of compounds with what he was calling the Mescaline Index. Is a given compound 10 times more potent than mescaline? So that mescaline was kind of used for a time as a base comparator. Yes, I wouldn't say that Shulgin Index, the plus 2 plus 3 rates potency so much as experiential intensity. It's like a comparatively low potency drug like mescaline at the right dose can still produce a very profound +3, perhaps even a +4 experience.
Right.
But yes, it is a useful way of ranking the experience component.
Yeah, and I guess that brings us to some of the compounds he did discover, and I guess there would be one that was perhaps a +5 that is very little known about, but Sasha's Aleph-1, the mysterious essence of power. Aleph meaning in geometric terms oneness of God or master or even school of learning. So the naming itself is interesting, but few people know anything about it.
Right. If memory serves, that's one of the sulfur derivatives. When I first met Sasha, I had a few years earlier read one of his seminal papers, the 1969 Nature paper on the one-ring psychotomimetics. And it was a bit over my head when I first read it, but I tried to catch up. But when I met him, he was starting to work on sulfur derivatives, which gave rise to the Aleph series and also the 2CT series. And I would take exception to +5. There was quite a nice paper that described his research approach and gave, I think, very solid justification for experimenting in humans at an early stage of development of these compounds. And he outlines that rating scale, but there's nothing beyond +4. +4, in fact, is not something that you can achieve reproducibly just by adjusting dosage. So it's a transcendent, ineffable state that cannot necessarily be repeated or reached intentionally. It often comes as a surprise, and he didn't have a +4A, +4B, or a +5. It kind of topped out at +4.
Yeah, but it seemed like that Aleph was one that he just really put up there. I guess what he's most well known for is the 2C series, and I had no idea there's actually 29 in the 2C series. Most people know perhaps A, B, and E, and perhaps I. And what's fascinating is that 2CB has come to hold a really sacred place in some African and South American shamanic traditions. I think it's called Ubalawu Nomathatholo. What could you tell us about that?
Well, I don't know a lot about that, but I think probably talking about 2CB use in Africa, yes?
Yes.
My understanding was that it was actually being produced commercially, and indigenous healers who were having difficulty obtaining the medicinal plants that they had used in their practices fell onto 2CB and discovered that it produced effects that they were easily able to take advantage of and work into their healing practices. So 2CB is a very interesting candidate for further development for therapeutic use and beyond. It's fairly well tolerated. Doesn't the possibility of it launching you into darker spaces, let's say, is a bit less than a lot of other compounds. Psilocybin itself, which has become so well accepted as psychotherapy, some pretty strange experience, inexplicable experiences. So, when I first met Roland Griffiths, I asked him, how is it that you elected to use psilocybin in your studies and not something with a bit of a more friendly character to it, like 2CB? And he was very frank. He said the synthetics have no real broad history. Psilocybin has a history in human use, and people sort of view it as being more benign. Oh, magic mushrooms, yeah, we've heard of those, and doesn't have the stigma of LSD, of course. So that was probably a valid choice, but now, of course, the responsibility lies on the scientific community to crack open the door and look at the rest of the palette, which is, as you point out, pretty broad.
So there's a few unknown compounds tucked away there in Sasha's notes, I imagine. But when it comes to the archive,
right.
What of the plants themselves? Have they been archived, or are they in someone's safe collection, or?
Well, we do have a lot of plant samples around here, but Sasha was not a trained botanist, so it's not as if we have a herbarium that we can draw on. Plants is always a bit tricky. The preservation of samples for future work is not a trivial proposition. So and even identifying the plants to begin with is also its own non-trivial exercise. So we probably have a more useful collection of his isolates from plants than actual plant matter itself. Although, admittedly, we do have probably a few hundred samples of cactus, kratom, little leaves in bottles. Sometimes they're legible labels, sometimes not. There's quite a collection of stuff here to sort through.
Right. Interesting. I had no idea he worked with kratom as well. There being
a little bit
alkaloids in that as well.
You broke up. You'll have to repeat that last one.
I was going to say, if you wanted to elaborate on what you know about the various alkaloids in kratom that Sasha was investigating. We're losing your audio too.
There are of course always a lot of folks who sent, can you help us figure out what's in these? And by and large, he would tear into anything that crossed his desk. But metragenine and the other compounds in kratom were already being worked on out there. So I think he was less interested in that than things that were more along the psychedelic line and or mysteries. He did some work, in fact, on Salvia divinorum, but never really got all that far. I think had actually the same experience that Hoffman did. They both had plants that were given to them, never were able to really achieve the salvia effect, and didn't have any way of kind of guiding how do you do an extract that to discover what part of the plant is causing the effect that you're tracking when you can't experience the effect that you're tracking.
Right.
So that kind of, although there are samples around here, that was not something that he was able to really work out.
Interesting, yeah, because there's a lot of debate over the most effective methods to consume salvia, traditional versus smoking, and so forth. I think there's still a lot to learn about that plant in particular. I guess
and of course its mode of action is so different. It's not really a psychedelic. Sasha had a very well-defined endpoint that he was seeking with all of his synthesis work, and that was basically what we now know as a serotonergic psychedelic effect. And salvia is not that. So and things like the dissociatives, ketamine, is not that. It was kind of fortuitous that he ran into MDMA in the way that he did. He had actually been told about MDMA when it started to actually circulate out in the club scene. Well, not club scene yet, but samples were making their way around. And I think a graduate student from Oregon told him, "Oh, this is something you should check into." He had already synthesized it back in as early as 1965. He called it N-methyl MDA, but never, by whatever chance, never consumed it up to a level where its effects manifested themselves. It's possible that he sampled it up to levels where he would have expected to see an effect and didn't, and didn't push it any higher, or just didn't have time to get to it. But once he actually sampled it up in the 75 milligram and higher range, that the unique character of MDMA became apparent. He, for better or worse, through his providing it to psychotherapists, and particularly to Leo Zeff, the scene kind of enlarged way beyond his expectations. He had a suspicion that it would be useful in psychotherapy. He didn't know what a tortured path it would take to get there.
Well, I'm sure he'd be quite pleased with where we are these days with MDMA trials into
finally, yeah.
Another one he was interested in was DOM. It's not particularly sort of common or popular in the broader psychedelic world.
Right. DOM is, if you could say any of Sasha's compounds were his problem child, it's probably DOM. When it first made its appearance in 1967, some enterprising chemists who ultimately were interested in generating capital to produce what ultimately was the Orange Sunshine Project got a hold of the synthesis method for DOM. They produced a good quantity of it and marketed it as an LSD substitute. There were some problems though. First off, the active range for DOM is on the order of 4 to 6 milligrams. DOM also has a long latent period, so once you've ingested it, you don't start to feel its effects for something on the order of 2 to 2.5 hours. third problem was the tablets that were made up were 20 milligram. So, as you might suspect, if you're being told that a new substance is an LSD substitute, you would assume that it sort of acts in broad terms like LSD. So in goes the 20 milligrams. Half an hour to an hour later, when LSD effects would have been more than manifest, the natural assumption would be, oh, maybe I didn't take enough. So folks were showing up in emergency rooms with maybe a couple or three of these things on board. And one of the characteristics of that series of substituted amphetamines is that the higher your dose, not only the more intense the experience, but the longer it lasts. So I think in PCAL, Sasha claims 18 to 36 hours for DOM. Now that said, it's actually been a very useful research tool. It's a more specific serotonin 2A receptor agonist than LSD, and it was often used, particularly in the development of early drug discrimination studies with rodents as a testing agent. So comparing stimulants with psychedelics, or something like MDMA with psychedelics. DOM was often used as the training drug for the animals. So in those days, we didn't have a direct test that involved administering a drug to a naive animal and looking for a particular response. At that point, there was this dual lever drug discrimination test where you would dose an animal and give it two levers to press, and if it pressed the right one, it would get a food pellet or a little bit of sugar water. And then you would repeat that exposure to drug and reward until the operant patterning was very well set. So then you could give a new drug and watch for a response. If there's no response, then the new drug doesn't resemble, to the animal's way of looking at it, the drug that you've trained with. However, if the new drug acts, to the animal's point of view, like the training drug, then it'll hammer away at the lever for the treat. So Dave Nichols' lab made extensive use of this, but it's an expensive test, and takes a lot of time to train the animals, and the analysis is costly, made costly that way. So now we've got another kind of assay that doesn't require training. If you inject mice with serotonin agonists, they go through a head twitch response. Think of the shake of a wet dog. And this doesn't require any training, and it's highly reproducible, and has now become kind of the gold standard for experimentation with to determine if a drug is in fact a serotonin agonist. So DOM has had its role, but it got off to a pretty rocky start. San Francisco in '67 probably didn't need DOM, which of course was called STP.
Ah, okay. There's the cultural context. Yeah, STP has that sort of legendary
Yes.
around this. Yeah. It sounds like the N-bone that we
Serenity, Tranquility,
sorry, what was the last one?
Serenity, Tranquility, and Peace was supposedly the acronym. Serenity, Tranquility, and Peace.
Okay, great.
But of course, the police referred to it as too stupid to puke.
Yeah, well, I guess if we're on the topic of police, we should talk about the raid on Shulgin, the 3 raids the Shulgin's lab fell victim to.
Yes, are you referring to the raid in '93?
Well, the raids in general, I think there was 2 from the DEA and one from local authorities, which forced him to, relinquish his license as opposed to it being forcibly taken away, as many understand.
Yes. The what I think I heard Sasha refer to as the great unpleasantness. Yeah, the Drug Enforcement Administration had been actually dependent on Sasha for quite a few years when they were getting organized. They used him as a consultant. He often testified in court cases, helped identify drugs that had been seized in busts of one sort or another. There's even an award in his office granted by the DEA for assistance in prosecutions. But once PCOL came out, their attitude shifted, and he became actually kind of a pariah. It kind of culminated in the bust that took place here, where the DEA and ultimately the Environmental Protection Agency and local law enforcement came down on Sasha's lab. He was never arrested, never charged with a crime, but he was fined for administrative violations of the regulations that control who can have a Schedule I license. And I think the writing was on the wall that the political climate was very much against psychedelics at that point. And Sasha relinquished his Schedule I license thereafter and removed all of the scheduled compounds from the collection here at the lab. He kept working, but shifted his attention to natural products chemistry. So that's when he really started to work on cactus chemistry quite extensively. One of the first goals of setting up the Alexander Shulgin Research Institute today will be to once again acquire Schedule I licenses so that we can fill out the collection, resynthesize materials that were destroyed after the 1993 raid, and restart the basic research. My colleague Nick Cozy has a Schedule I license at his lab at the University of Wisconsin, and we're confident that we can use his expertise in getting the bureaucratic aspects handled and get the work going again.
It's fantastic. True revival of the Shulgin era and his work. It's fantastic. Yeah, so I guess he sort of withdrew from public life after that to some extent. After a lifelong quest to unlock the complexities of the human mind, as I've read that. So that sounded like those raids sort of really caused him to withdraw a little bit from any public appearance.
Sasha was he was a marvelously gregarious person. He kept speaking at public forums until really quite late. One of the last major talks that he gave was in Basel, Switzerland, for the 100th birthday party for Albert Hofmann. I think that was his last major lecture in public, but he kept his public persona open for the duration. He was not silenced by the great unpleasantness.
That's good to know. Yeah, I guess that ties us nicely back to Bicycle Day, and throwing back to Nick if there's any questions coming up on the YouTube.
So I'm here monitoring in the comments, but we have no particular questions at the moment. But I will just prompt, if you do have any questions, please do drop them in the comments section. We've got about 10-15 more minutes, and we'd love to do some questions. I'm trying to think if I've got any. I've got Peakle sitting in my other room that I was just having a flick through, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. What about you, Jeff?
I was thinking, the DOM was, what do you call that in his down his magical half dozen? So why were those, along with mescaline and 4 of the 2C series, what made him classify those as a magical half dozen?
Well, they were substances that had character that really wasn't duplicated elsewhere. So some of them have more potential for creating deep insight. 2CE is one that comes to mind. Some have perhaps more of a spiritual color to them. 2CT7 comes to mind, but they stood out. As I pointed out, the thing that he discovered very early on was the difference in character between all these substances. Some could be, interesting, insightful, but perhaps so gruelingly long. The 2CG compounds are examples that they almost wore you out to the point that not be an experience that you would want to repeat. Mm-hmm. So the magical half dozen, I would have to refresh my memory, but those are 3 that come to mind.
The others,
2CT, 2CT7,
T2. Yeah, 2CE, 2CB, 2C, T2, T7, dominant mescaline.
I would throw TMA2 in there. It's another lovely compound, but it's a bit more long-lived, and that might not be everyone's cup of tea.
Take a level of familiarity and experience to navigate that length of time in those realms. I guess DIPT was another one that he was noted for.
Yeah, DIPT is a fascinating one. It struck him most because it has a reproducible effect on your perception of sound. Mm-hmm. Causes your sense of pitch to be off. I've not experienced that one, but I have been told that it's still a full psychedelic, but it does have this odd characteristic of causing your sense of pitch to be like several steps lower than it should be.
Yeah, almost disharmonic. One of the local researchers, Des Tramaci, wrote an article for the EGA journal a couple of years ago on DIPT and sound dysphoria.
Yeah, auditory dysphoria, perhaps. Yeah, an interesting one. And the tryptamines are really a fascinating bunch. Again, as I point out, Sasha's main contribution in the realm of the tryptamines was in synthesizing them and characterizing their human effects. In TCAL, I think there's only one of the TCAL compounds that where Sasha was an author on the first description of the compound. So they weren't original chemistry for him, but the human effects that he describes in TCAL are all original and extremely valuable. In TCAL and the tryptamine world, I think there's even more variety of effect than there isn't with the phenethylamines. There are some of them that have a very complete psychological effect, but no visual side effects. LSD and a lot of the 2C compounds are, have very striking visual perception changes, seeing patterns overlaid on surfaces, closed-eyed fantasy. And there are a few of the tryptamines that definitely put you in the psychological space of psychedelia, but with no visual distortions at all. And it'll be very interesting to figure out why that is.
Yes, we were talking earlier about acacias, and there's a compound quite prevalent in many Australian acacias called NMT, or monomethyltryptamine, which has that similar quality. Right. It's not particularly visual, but it's sort of spatial and psychological rather than purely like DMT. And I guess one of the others,
right.
the other bits of Sasha's work would be his 5-MeO DMT synthesis, which is now becoming, a hot topic given the ecological pressure on toads and unscrupulous harvesting there.
Right.
I do have
Actually, my first research project as an undergraduate was an internship I had where I was working on tryptamines in phalaris grass. And of course, a lot of the early work on phalaris was done in Australia. Culvener and his group, really kind of laid down the foundation for understanding how that plant worked. 5-MeO DMT is a real interesting one. I know it's become very very popular. It's not one that does a thing for me. I've tried it a few times, and there was definite failure to launch. But maybe I'm just unlucky in that respect.
Well, McKenna called it, described it as just a feeling, so I imagine he was in the same boat.
I have got a question in the YouTube comments. This one from Henry, who is asking Paul if you can comment on Tweetios. He says it's something about. He says you'll know what he's talking about, but it's something ethiotoxy substitution that hasn't been looked into much. So I can't decode that. Hopefully you can.
This is a group of phenethylamines. Most of the 2C compounds are they have a distinct pattern of substitutions on the phenyl ring. The 2 and the 5 position are methoxy in the 2C compounds with something on the 4 position. So 2CB is 2,5-dimethoxy 4-bromo. 2CI is 2,5-dimethoxy 4-iodo. The 2CT compounds are 2,5-dimethoxy. This is getting repetitive. And then a sulfur and then something, a small alkyl chain at the 4 position. The Tweetios, instead of having methoxys, they have ethoxys in the 2 and the 5 position. They have distinct pharmacology. There are in fact combinations where there's methoxy, ethoxy, and methoxy in either the 2 or the 5 position, and the ethoxy being in the corresponding other position. They have distinct pharmacology. One of Sasha's acolytes actually did quite a bit of work with these and thought they might have some promise in enhancing cognition. And there was actually some experimental work done on students taking exams with and without the Tweetios on board. And I think it was done where there were study periods, a dose of drug, and then an examination. So with and without drugs, it obviously becomes very complicated with small sample size, but there was some interesting indication that there might be improved cognition. Now, what we now know today with respect to other psychedelics is that they actually can enhance neuroplasticity. So they physically can change the way the neurons grow and interconnect in the brain. So I think there's every reason to believe that something like that might have been happening with those compounds. We just don't know. There are only a few labs in the country that work on that kind of problem. We've met with some of them already, and they're interested in looking at compounds that they don't have. So we'll probably be looking to collaborate with them to see if we can flesh out that understanding a bit.
It's like the ultimate nootropic.
Yes, precisely.
Anything else coming in, Nick?
No other questions in the comments right now. If you do have one, please drop it in, because we will be wrapping shortly. But just want to say thank you to everybody who has been watching and commenting on YouTube. This will also be available for re-watching afterwards, so do share it with your friends. And we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. So share it across the platforms.
One last question, Paul. Did you know, Sasha?
Well, it's been a real pleasure, gentlemen.
I was just going to throw in a last question about whether Sasha knew anything of mescaline isolation from eucalypt sawdust, which the Australian Army looked into, I think, early 60s.
Yes. Now, my recollection of this is that they isolated gallic acid from lignin digestion, and then took the gallic acid up through the known chemistry to mescaline. I believe that's what they did. I ran into that paper years and years ago and have not tried to find it again. But it's basically by virtue of the lignin containing a trimethoxy phenyl as part of the structure of the lignin, and that can be pulled out with like an alkali digestion, that kind of thing. Gallic acid synthesis to mescaline is there are many steps. I've done it a couple of times, particularly to incorporate deuterium labeling into the finished product. So it's still a useful thing to know how to do.
Yeah, I think the Army published the results. They confirmed that it was there, but they never sort of elaborated on the process and what they did with it after that.
Somehow that's not a complete surprise.
Exactly. Yeah.
We do have friends who are now no longer with us who did quite a bit of work with incapacitating agents for military purposes, and psychedelics were involved, mostly LSD, but also mostly tropane alkaloids, and there you're getting into very, very weird territory.
Is it true that those tropane alkaloids eventually became VZ gas?
BZ is in that group and came from that research. The issue with those, of course, people find out about tropanes and think that they might be interesting to experiment with. They create a state that's completely separate from a psychedelic state. The only really good comparison I could make is it's like sleepwalking. You can have your eyes open, be having a conversation with maybe someone who's there, but also maybe with someone who's not there. And unfortunately, after the drug wears off, there's the complete amnesia of the experience. Not fun compounds.
Yeah. It's also it seems to.
But you can see how
eyesight as well. And perhaps that's the anticholinergic effect on the acetylcholine system.
Right. Yeah, it's a very, very difficult area to look at historically. The idea that the military had was that if they could deliver this to an opposed military unit, not only would the people receiving the exposure be knocked out of commission, but their buddies would have to take care of those folks to keep from harming themselves. So the ability to actually carry on a military maneuver would be pretty much suspended. But to the best of my knowledge, it was never actually used in battle.
Yeah, that's a whole other dark chapter of our psychedelic past, our collective past. We're coming up to just an hour there. Nick, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, just on that final one, it reminds me that it all depends on how you look at it. If you're afraid of dying and you're holding on, you see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels freeing you from the world. It all depends on how you look at it. I think the movie Jacob's Ladder from the late 80s, early 90s was sort of inspired by some of the BZ related compounds. That's still a fun movie. I think they remade it, as seems to happen every 20 or 30 year cycles, but don't bother with that. Just go watch the 1980s or early 90s one. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, and thank you very much to Jeff Baker and Paul Daley from the Shulgin Research Centre. If you want to find out more, just check in the comments of the YouTube channel there, and you'll be able to find some links. So thank you very much, and happy Bicycle Day, everyone. Enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Paul.
Happy Bicycle Day.